Because I think it will be a very interesting debate about the civil society and civil institutions. Having been for many, many years a politician, I more and more got the knowledge or the conviction that civil society is an important part of political life and political development. And very often politics and bureaucracy are preventing development, civil society is pushing for it. Nevertheless, of course, in politics and also in party economics, there is some suspicion about civil society being egoistic, being self-oriented, and not really being interested in the development of democracy. For me, civil society is part of the democracy and of democratic development. So, of course, then there's the question about civil society in Russia. Is it existing? Is it developing? Is it restricted? Is it going forward? I think that's very important because very often, as I tried to mention yesterday, Russia is President Putin, and maybe his bureaucracy or some lack of rule of law, but Russia is not seen so much as society, as people who maybe also have some sort of possibility to express itself in civil society. If it has, we will see, the debate will bring it. So my suggestion would perhaps that Ambassador Cede, who has been ambassador in Russia for some time, is going to give some introduction in putting down his view about civil society in Russia, so that the view from an internal, external combination, because he knows Russia and has always contact with Russian representatives, but of course he is not a Russian. He is looking in so far from the outside, but with knowledge from the inside. And then we will ask our Russian colleagues who are really from the inside to present their case and give an answer perhaps to some of the questions or statements Ambassador Cede will bring forward. Ambassador Cede, please.
Thank you very much. Don't be afraid. You don't have to expect a long, lengthy speech on my part. I rather try to kick off the discussion with a small proposition and a reminder. I went to Moscow as the Austrian ambassador exactly 20 years ago. This was at the time when the Yeltsin era came to an end, and Putin, very much to the surprise of the general public, was nominated by President Yeltsin as his successor in the office of president. This happened very much at the end of 1999. I was skiing with my family in Tyrol, and on the radio it was announced that Yeltsin will step down and Putin will be his successor. So I asked my very esteemed predecessor, Walter Siegel, whom I saw in the morning in this room, whether I shouldn't go directly back to Moscow to be present there. And he said, no, keep skiing in Austria. Important things in Russia always happen when the ambassador is out of the country. At that time, the general view was that civil society and civil institutions were very weak, that the rule of law was in a bad state of affairs. The rule of law was handicapped by the fact that the judiciary, the tribunals, didn't work properly, that citizens had no trust in the judiciary system. So the overwhelming position of political observers, not only from the West but also in Russia, they proposed and they took the view that the civil society was almost non-existing, that it was very weak, and that the same state of affairs also related to the situation of civil institutions. So my proposal would be now to shift 20 years ahead of time and look at the state of affairs of civil institutions and of the civil society now, 20 years after the rise to power of President Putin. And I venture to say, and allow me to note that my knowledge of Russian affairs nowadays emanates from the media, and I'm no longer in the middle of everything in Moscow, but of what I read and of what I gather from the information available to me is to say that civil society hasn't improved since 1999. It's still weak, and the same goes for civil institutions. Perhaps they're even weaker. I wonder whether this statement conforms to your opinion, or whether I would be happy if we could rectify this proposition and perhaps give it a more positive assessment. This is just as a kick-off, meant as a kick-off for our discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's very rare that ambassadors say something and then says, please tell me it's not true. But let's hope together that in some ways things change more than you realized. And the first question for answer would go to Andrey Kolesnikov. He's senior fellow, the chair of the Russian Domestic Politics and Political Institutions program at Carnegie in Moscow. So what do you say to this provocation that it's still very, very weak civil society? Is it or is it not?
It is true. I have it in the slide presentation.
Okay.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here. And my preliminary apologize for disappearing after this panel, because I have to go to Moscow right now. Here is such a provocative title. Yes, we have to talk about the state when we're talking about civil society in Russia. Because everything in Russia is state-dependent, as you can understand from the previous panel, and the civil society is in the same position as economy or political sphere, any sphere in Russia. So we are confusing frequently Putin's Russia and Russia as such, and this is a big mistake, because the country as such is a different thing if you compare it to a political system and state-oriented organization, state-oriented part of economy, state-oriented part of civil society. We can't confuse it. This is such a methodological note before this presentation. So I will try to submerge you into a more broad context, not simply talk about some organizations of civil society, NGOs, and all that stuff. We must understand the environment of the civil society in today's Russia. And the main question is about changes, because civil society is a kind of a driver of changes, not only a state. Sometimes we are thinking. So the first slide is from our mutual report with the Weather Center, which we have made in August 2017. And in that very time, it found out that the majority of Russians wants decisive comprehensive changes. You can see in the figures. It was a bit unexpected. But the problem was in understanding what does it mean changes. Does it mean reforms? Does it mean modernization or something? So 10 months later, in May 2018, the Weather Center repeated the same questions. And you can see the noticeable growth of the option decisive changes, 57%. It means again that after the presidential elections, people wanted more and more and more changes. It didn't mean that they wanted more and more great Russia, because it found out again from our research that we have achieved this goal. Russia became great again. And the focus was turning to more substantive problems, I mean problems of economy and social sphere. How it was until the presidential elections of Putin in March 2018. Three pillars of this regime and three pillars of public moods. Negative adaptation, primarily in an economic sphere and social sphere. Negative mobilization and consolidation on the ground of reunited nation around a flag to rally and symbolic meaning of Putin. And negative identification. We are different. We are not Westerners. We have some years history. We have a special meaning of sovereignty and so on and so forth. It was a part of, so to say, informal social contract between the population and authorities. We are supporting you in exchange for the feeling of a great power, in exchange for some minimum of social benefits. And this social contract experienced a serious erosion since May, June of the previous year, the year 2018. I name it great divergence in an image of Putin, because until then, since March 2014, he was simply a symbol of Russia, a symbol of greatness, flag, not more. But since last summer, we are witnessing another process. Putin became a living flesh, a human being who shares responsibility for unpopular steps with the government, with ministers, with anyone in the system. And this is a problem for him. And you know, it was not simply pension reform. The process is more complex. And if we shall go in depth, we can see that this is kind of an erosion of this image. And it was a slump in his approval rating even in the middle of the presidential campaign. It was strange to observe, but it was so. It means that he has to mobilize people all the time. What has happened in July and August? I name it the end of the old-fashioned mobilization, because Crimean consensus doesn't work. Yes, we have this consensus. This is one of the pillars, layers of the system, but it doesn't mobilize people to the same extent. These are some consequences for this regime. If we are making synonymous this terms Putin and regime, we must understand that this personalistic system, this is the same. So here is the picture of decrease in his approval rating. The answer to the question, do we approve of the activity of the president? Here is a plateau of 66% in recent 3 months. last months of 2018, and then one more decline in January of this year. What do people want from Putin? What do people want from the regime? What is the meaning of this new, let's say, populist demand? It is not red, it is not white, it is not green, it is not yellow. This is simply demand for some changes, for a better life, for something. And this is a problem to decipher the meaning of this new demand. The main feature of this demand is uncertainty. How to work with demand, with this demand, this is the question. And what is civil society in the current situation? This is a really important question because the situation is changing all the time, and I would say that we have kind of a new civil society which has more informal nature, because the NGOs of the normal kind of NGOs, in the traditional sense, they're still working here, but we have special legislation about foreign agents, legislation about undesirable organizations, and it spoils the civil society of a normal type. So, and we're witnessing the appearance of civil society of a new kind, which is extremely informal, which is trying to make de-bureaucratization, so to say, of the protest. It's all about resistance to some states' initiatives. This is because of that I'm talking about the importance of this interconnection between state initiatives and civil society. Part of these organizations is non-state dependent, non-state oriented. This is kind of a parallel life in the circumstances of an efficient state. And I would say that this is kind of a hybrid war inside the society, because civil society of a new kind is struggling on several fronts with the state. With the state as such, resisting, for instance, during some protests against landfills, garbage reform, and so on and so forth, against reconstruction, permanent reconstruction of not only Moscow but in some other cities in Russia. Part of the problem is the problem of buying civil society by Kremlin. If you want to continue your activity, you have to coordinate your steps with Kremlin, and I can say that this is a normal situation. One more flank of this war is the struggle with the conservative civil society. I mean, some far rightist primarily organizations which are also kind of a part of the society, which are sometimes state-dependent and state-inspired, but we can name it part of civil society as well. And with society as such, which is still in political apathy, social apathy, something like that. So the state has to decipher this new demand to work with ethical society, with civil society organization, active civil society which is struggling with the state and so on and so forth, not having proper instruments to understand what is really happening in the society. What state understands that they have to do some changes, to initiate some changes. And you can see that this picture, this is Russian Moscow's metro, colored train of changes. I saw this kind of train twice in underground. So this is one of the state responses to the real civil society. They're trying to imitate the activity of civil society. They're trying to mirror the civil society and to nationalize some actions of civil society. And this is an answer to this new grassroots modernization from the civil society. What state is doing in that sense? Again, they're mirroring the civil society, and they're trying to pour money into social sphere, simply in terms of budget policy, but they're trying to support social license agendas, social license, civil society organizations. And these organizations have to coordinate their activity with the state. In a more broad sense, the state is trying to not having an opportunity to, not having desire to change institutions, they're trying to change faces. We name it in Russia technocratization of the policy. And right now, digitalization of everything is a substitute of a normal modernization, development, reference, and so on and so forth. I'm afraid that this policy will not work properly. So I will stop myself here. I hope this is kind of a big picture for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the answer is not a clear yes, not a clear no, but it is new dimensions, and anyway there is a dynamics defined, which was not to be found perhaps some years ago, and that was quite interesting to have this information. Now, fortunately on this panel there are two women, so sorry that you had only a male panel, but we compensate that. And we go into the practical field, so to say, and Nyuta Federmesser, head of Moscow Multidisciplinary Center for Palliative Care, founder of the Vera Hospice Charity Foundation and Trustee at the Foundation for Palliative Care Education, is fortunately here, so we know that you are very active and you are one of the big shots now in the field of civil society. And please, may I ask you to give your impression
of what's happening in Russia today with civil society.
Yes.
Well, to start with, thank you for being here. And I think you're all wrong. It's flourishing, and it will flourish. There's a word in Russia. How many of you do not speak Russian at all? Oh, well, quite a few. I don't know the translation of this word into English. For those who know it, it is skorovarka. This is a special, like a pot where...
Pressure cooker. It's a pressure cooker.
Okay, a pressure cooker. The Russian word for it is skorovarka. And the effect... What did you say, sorry?
It explodes usually in the end.
No, it explodes usually in the end if you misuse it, and you misuse it if you're a bad cook. It never explodes.
I'm not using it, it's not very healthy.
It's my turn to talk, and I have the microphone. So the fact is, because when it's really closed, everything that's inside cooks much faster. And I think that this, what you call Putin era, has put us into the pressure cook, and we've flourished faster than everybody thought. And we are cleverer than, much cleverer than decades ago. My parents were part of dissidents. They were dissidents. And yes, I think we are cleverer because we have found ways of how to work with the authorities, how to work with the government, and still with all the problems that every country has to solve the challenges that we face. And I think Andrey, where are you? Yeah, sorry. Behind the ambassador, I didn't see you. This, on your presentation, one of the first slides, about changes. How many people think that we need changes? How many people think that we need very serious changes, or we don't need? Go to any country, United States, Austria, Poland, Israel, ask the same questions. You will have the same answers. Because if you ask people who can think, they will always want changes. Okay, I can think, I want changes, I will go to the front because I'm a teacher and I think, no, can I go in the front? No? Thank you.
Be flexible.
Yes, Yes, I'm the part of civil society that breaks the rules usually. Hospices and palliative care and death. This is what's about everyone, and this is the only part in lives of every person which actually makes us all equal. Those who are there and those who are here, everyone is equal. Because when we are born, in every language, I think in every culture, there's a phrase which can show the difference between people when they are born. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, or he was born in Russian in a t-shirt, or родился в рубашке. There's no such idiom, there's no such words about dying people. And in hospice wards we have people who are homeless, professors, politicians, millionaires who have money to undergo treatment in Switzerland, in Austria, in Israel. But when they face death and when they know that it's their last months, they all want to go back home. And yes, our hospices are not the level of British, where we learned about hospice care. And we don't have enough wards for one person and the family. So we have wards for 3 people, for 4 people, for 5 people sometimes, which is very bad. But as a result, we have different people in one ward. And they're all equal. Because when a person is absolutely 100% dependent on the others, nothing matters. But I'm sorry, because I think that I'm going to say some very simple and very banal things, but nothing matters but love and who is next to you. And I am the head of Moscow Hospices and Palliative Care for the last 3 years, and in this last 3 years I had 3 different election campaigns. Hospices started in Russia with my mother, and when she was the head of then the sole hospice in Moscow, she never allowed elections to be held on the territory of the hospice. She said, no, my patients are not going to take part in this show. And I was more dependent and less independent, and I thought, okay, if the authorities think that hospice patients should vote, they will, but I will be there all the time. I will not allow any, there was this word, карусель, when extra, help me, bulletins, bulletins are thrown into. So I thought I'll be there and I will follow and I will see that everything is absolutely 100% correct. And how big was my surprise when I saw that about 90% of our patients who could think and who could take decisions, they said, yes, we want to take part in the elections. And some of them said, of course I will. This is my last chance to influence what's going to be in this country, to influence the life of my children or my grandchildren. Some of them thought and said that I've never done this before, but I now will, because I will have no other chance. Some of them said, I will do this because when you are so ill, your life is rather boring, and that's at least some fun. There were different reasons, and we had very interesting results of elections. And yes, as the rest of the country, about 87% were for Putin. And that was the first time when I thought, I have lived in a different Russia. I've lived in a different Moscow. I lived with my friends, with my relatives. I went to a very specialized school where everybody was friends, then university where everyone was friends. Then I worked for Kasparov Chess, and I had a very particular people around me. And then I worked in UCAS with top management, and then I worked Golden Mask Theatre Festival, and then suddenly I'm working with hospices, with dying people, and there's no difference between a homeless and a professor, and that's how they vote. And this was something which I was not planning to say, but somehow maybe that's the first time when I do feel aggressively patriotic. Sorry. When my mother started hospices, that was 26 years ago, and she never knew this word. She worked as an oncologist, and very soon she realized that whenever a person was sad in between doctors that he cannot be cured, the person was just thrown out. And it depended on the doctor what would be said, whether a person is thrown out to die at home or to continue some treatment at home. And the treatment didn't exist then. And that was when, that was the time of Sakharov and Likhachov, and they introduced my mother to a British journalist, Victor Zorja, who was a Holocaust survivor. He was a Jew born in not far from Warsaw, and he was the only in his family who escaped. He escaped and ran to the Soviet Union. There in the Soviet Union, he was taken into Gulag. He escaped Gulag as well. And literally barefoot, he went to and found in Kuybyshev, then now Samara, he found Ilya Yerenburg. And Ilya Yerenburg literally invited him to his home and fed him and asked why he was looking for him. And he said, because I like Julio Guranita, that's the book. And Yerenburg was right, because that was the book that should not be read and pronounced, and most of those books were destroyed. And he then decided that he would help the boy to go. There was no way back to Poland, obviously, but he knew he could help him escape to United Kingdom. Victor escaped with help of Ilya Yerenburg to United Kingdom. He spent the rest of the war as part of Royal Air Force, and he became a journalist. He was in the Soviet Union. He was thought to be a CIA agent, and in the United Kingdom he was thought to be a KGB agent, and maybe he was both. I'm practically sure that he was both. He was an absolutely great man, one of the wisest and cleverest who I've ever met. He was a criminologist, and he was so unlucky that his daughter died in the first British hospice. And when she died, she told him, while dying, she asked him to be truthful with her. She said, I don't understand really why our family is not a real family. I know there's some mystery about you, but I don't know what this mystery actually is. I know that there's been a lot of lies. I'm dying, please tell me. And he told her, lies number one is I'm a Jew. Lies number two is that I've never said this to anyone after I escaped. And lie number three is I don't know what else to say. But she said that she died happy, and she asked him very much that he should continue hospice movement, hospice philosophy in the countries that helped him live and survive. And that was Poland, that was Soviet Union, and that was, strangely as it may seem, India, because after the war he went to India, where he tried to come to peace with his mind, where he actually found, in late 60s, he found Mother Teresa and got acquainted with her and learned about mercy a lot from her. And he told a lot to Jane in the last days of her life, and the first place where he went after that was St. Petersburg. It was then under Sobchak, and Sobchak was rather open and let him start. He met Sobchak, actually organized this meeting between Victor Zorja and Likhachov. And they, 27 years ago from now, they started the first hospice in Russia and in St. Petersburg in Lakhta. And there, at the opening of this hospice, was then young Putin, which I never knew until 3 months ago. He was in Sobchak's team, but I don't know who he was actually, but anyway. Then he moved to Moscow, Victor moved to Moscow. It was I don't remember. I was quite young. I don't remember really. But I remember my mother, who was very agitated, and said that, oh, you know, girls, back to me and my sister, what I'm doing is actually called hospice. And I'm not crazy. I'm not mad. It's part of medicine in the rest of the world. And what she did was she left her job. She no longer worked as an oncologist. She found her patients who were thrown out as they couldn't be cured, and she literally looked after them. She came to their places, talked to their wives, husbands, children. She lived there and taught the family, change diapers, cure pain, just be next to and hold hands. And Victor said, you're going to run the first Moscow hospice. She said, no, I'm never running in a department in a hospital. I'm not going to run anything. And he said, you will. And I was then, I think, 17 or 18, and he said that he will take me to United Kingdom and he will teach me, and he did. And I lived in his place, and unfortunately it so happened that he died. He was my first hospice patient, and he died on my hands. My mother was very much against me working in hospices. She said, there's no money, no legislation, nobody knows what it's about, it's against the Russian culture, it's against everything. And in Moscow I was a student of a linguistic university. But it's, you know, life is wiser. I've always been a volunteer in different hospices, and Mom needed translation of different things, of different medical books and everything. And when she was ill, she was very ill for the last 8 years of her life. She needed a Winchester, an extra brain next to her. So I was her hard disk. I was next to her every day, and I knew her thoughts, her ambitions, her everything. It was very natural that after her death, I became the head of the first Moscow hospice. That was 8 years ago. And Vera Hospice Charity Foundation, Vera is my mother's name, Vera Milionchikova. That's the name of the foundation, and Vera has become very, very active. That was my sublimation, that was how I coped with her death. Then we still had around Lisa Glinka, Dr. Lisa, if everybody's heard this name. She came from the United States, and my mother was a dissident and brought in the Soviet Union. She grew in Lithuania, actually. My mother was an absolute victim of an idea of, well, help me with English, всемирный заговор.
Conspiracy.
Conspiracy theory, yes. Everybody was a spy, my mom thought. Actually, she was married 3 times, and her second husband was a KGB guy, and she never knew this before. And as soon as she learned it, she divorced. But she really was an absolute, that was fun to look at her, because everybody was a spy, of course. And she said, Lisa Klinka is a spy. And she was very straightforward, and she said this to Lisa Glinka, and said, well, Lisa, okay, tell me what exactly you want. Why would you come back from the United States to Russia? Why would you say that you're going to help me with palliative care? There's something strange about it, I just don't believe you. Can't be true. And Lisa said, why did you believe Victor Zoser? And she said, because Victor is a Jew, she said. That's about how people think. You can never know, you can never predict. But Lisa spent literally a day, 26 hours under my mom's door, in front of mom's cabinet door. She wouldn't leave that place till Vera talked to her. And they got friends after, and Lisa first hospice in this, it wasn't the Soviet Union, the CIA. It was in Kiev, in Ukraine. And the only quarrel between my mother and Lisa Glinka was when mother found out that in a prospect in a book about Lisa's hospice in Kiev, she used pictures from mom's hospice in Moscow. There was a big quarrel between, that's my wards, that's my patients, why would you use them in your, in propaganda of your hospice? In every country, I think, a lot of changes, and the most important changes happen because one sole person decides that this sphere of life has to be changed. It doesn't depend on the scale of the country, as Russia shows. It doesn't depend on the money that the country has or a political regime or whichever. History shows that one person there's always one person that changes the world. And hospice and palliative care, they are, in my opinion, the reason and the start of new Russia. And I'm very happy that both Vera and Lisa, only from the sky they can see what's happening, but I'm absolutely sure that if there's anything that's out of politics, that's out of any conflicts, this is palliative care and hospices, because we're all the same in that. Can we switch on the presentation, and I will show you some numbers. And how do I change the slides? I don't want to say the numbers. I just want to show the pictures, because everything that I said was not on the schedule. Okay. How do I move this? Thank you. This is a typical European picture. That's how we and you know hospices. And this is what most people think about hospices in Russia. In fact, it's not a hospice, but this is the image that we have. And the question is, what is myth or what is reality? None is reality. I've been to about 100 different hospices all over the world, and people, they are different. And people die in different conditions. What unites all the hospices in civilized world is that people have no pain, and in Russia, unfortunately, they do. So this is the gap between the pictures, and the task for Viktor Soldier, for Vera Milyonchikova, for Lisa Glinka, the task was to find a bridge between the gaps. And the bridge is here in Europe. The bridge was in teachers, in nurses and doctors who came from United Kingdom, from Israel, from Germany to Russia, and taught our nurses and doctors how to move from here to here. That's numbers. That's how many people needed palliative care in Russia. 1,300,000, and only 24% got it. I think much less. This is because this is official statistics, and that's about pain relief. Again, 25% out of all who need it. Again, I think this is false data, because this is official statistics. But I read a lot, and I know that 76% of all people who need palliative care in the world have no access to it. So we are not the worst case. And why I think that palliative care is inevitably a huge part of politics, and if a politician has brain, it should use palliative care as an absolutely perfect tool, because it's practically free and it's very, very influential. This is how many patients we have. If a patient dies quickly with no palliative care of a heart attack, then okay, but about 87% of the world's population die needing palliative care. And if they have it, then you have family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, those who are grateful, those who stay and live after, but they are not traumatized by bad death. They are not traumatized, and they stay grateful. People always remember that somebody helped them when they were miserable. And we very quickly forget presents and gifts and smiles which come to us when we get married, when we have children who are born. We will never forget help that has come when somebody of our closest was dying. So it's 18 million people every year who will either live aggressively after somebody dies with no help from the state, or who will live with with thank you in their hearts, who will live knowing that their beloved ones were helped by the state. And when I realized this 4 years ago, and I figured out, okay, it's not only doctors who should be my allies, politicians should be my allies, the situation has started to change. This number is true about the rest of the world, not only Russia. And this is how many people can have access now in Russia to palliative care, from practically zero 15 years ago. Can I go to Austria, Germany, United States, Canada, take the model of palliative care and bring it to Russia? No, I cannot, because there's no other country, I think, in the world that would have so many differences. We can have hospices here, but we cannot have hospices there. It's useless. How should it be organized? And yes, in order to do something there, this boiling under a pressure cook, this civil society that boils in a pressure cook, we need to talk to politicians and the people who make decisions, because I have to tell them, look, there we only need helicopters and morphine and nurses, and that's it. No other way out. This two pictures, it's 57 kilometers difference. 57 kilometers, just 1 hour by car, and very different life. And the person in this house is my patient. She refuses to go to any hospice because she says, "У меня тут порося и куря. I have my pigs and my hens here. I won't go anywhere." So how do I organize palliative care there? That's cultural difference. Palliative care in the parts of the country that have that population, they look after their elderly. In the 26 years which I've been working in a hospice, I've only had about 2 dozens of Muslim patients. Can you imagine this? Inwards, in the homes, a lot of course, in the homes, in their houses where they invite us as experts and they need painkilling, but we never see them in the wards, in the hospices. Actually, these are parts of civil society who have changed the situation. That's a rear admiral who shot himself to death, and he left a note: please do not blame anyone except the Ministry of Health and the government, because his wife spent 3 days trying to get morphine for him, and she couldn't. And his statues made it possible for him to open any door, so he could actually go to Putin himself. And it didn't work for him. This blood, again another Russian word, did not help him have a decent death. That's another lady, 3 months after the suicide. For 3 years she was sued because she prescribed morphine to a patient who was not in her region. So she legally she had no right to do this. But with the help of civil society and of journalists, she's not only survived, she actually got a compensation quite big, 2 million rubles, and she even married one of the policemen. She was in her 70s already when it happened. She's very happy now, I hope. That's the latest story. It's only half a year ago. We had a lady, mother, arrested because she bought drugs for her son on a black market, because we have no access to drugs for children. And it's dreadful. And we had so much noise in Facebook and wherever. And this whole story helped me to calculate the amount of drugs that we really need in Russia, and I hope we're going to solve the problem in the next 6 months to come. That's another girl who died in Moscow because there was no pain killing in Makhachkala. They came to Moscow, but unfortunately she couldn't get it. And this is WHO, World Health Organization triangle. It's not invented by me or by anybody in Russia. And political will at the top shows that this is the only thing that helps to change the situation from enthusiasts to the system. So yes, we have to work with politicians if we want to have education, drugs availability and infrastructure to provide palliative care. That's another patient, 13 years old. Her last wish, she was a photographer, and her last wish was she wanted a photo camera, and that's the pictures that she made, and we sent it to the deputies, to deputate, to the Duma. Okay. That's what we have really today, children who have no drugs to kill their pain, and because doctors don't want to fill in all the papers. That's the real situation. And that's the person the two people who started it, and who passed away, both of them, and Lisa, the third one. And all these dreadful situations, they gave me the right to go to a State Duma and try and change something there. Another thing, yes, a friend of... It always works like this. Personal tragedy always makes things change. You will see this if you want. This is what Vera Foundation has done, the last pictures. Someone who can't be cured can still be helped. We lived with this motto, with this logo for practically 10 years. And a year and a half ago, we changed to life to the end of life. And it suddenly happened that people are no longer afraid. They're not so much afraid to deal with us when we went from here to here. And what can be done if you are not afraid to talk to politicians? Moscow mayor came to the first Moscow hospice, and these two people, they are a married couple, they got married that day. Then on Valdai Forum, I think it was this summer, when there was a lot of talks about war and Syria and Donetsk and everything, and to one of the questions he said, "I'm not afraid." And that was when I stood up and said, okay, you are not afraid, but about 1.5 million people every year in our country are afraid. They are afraid to die, and they are afraid to die in pain, and you are the president, so could you please help? Because I think it's in your power. And I think he heard it, because we had a meeting, a long one, for about an hour, just before the new year, and he visited, and that's a very small hospice, in the regions, and that's a big hospice in St. Petersburg, the first children's hospice. He was here on Christmas. And a week from now, in a week's time, we are going to have a second hearing of a law on palliative care in Russian Parliament. And these are the structures who agreed to be with me and help me move it. These are countries with underdeveloped palliative care in the world, and this is where I hope we're going to come in 5, 7, maybe 10 years' time, if in a week's time this law passes, and if I have enough support everywhere. And that's how it works, and that's how it is already now. Not every country, and not Austria, can boast about children on lung ventilation having a chance to be in a swimming pool. That's a lady who wanted to look as Chanel before she died. And that's the last thing, and I'm sorry for being so long, but I wanted you to see that civil society exists and can change a lot, because if we change death, we change everything. How do we switch this on? That's 30 seconds. No, look. I don't know how to switch it on, sorry. Listen to it, it's important, because it's about life. There's no sound. No? No, you can't read it.
You could read it.
Can you make it with the sound from the beginning, because it's 30 seconds and it's important.
хосписом. Мы не знаем, есть ли жизнь после смерти. Но мы точно знаем, что есть жизнь до. Фонд помощи хосписам «Вера». Жизнь на всю оставшуюся жизнь.
So civil society knows how to use a pressure cook. It won't blow up. It will cook us faster. Thank you very much and sorry for being so long.
Thank you for your aggressive patriotism, which you explained, and this is, I think, a very good expression, and we need it in many of our countries for different reasons. Thank you very much. And now, Olga, if I may call you from the public. Olga Romanova is Director of Russia Behind Bars. You will continue in the same way. Please, Olga.
Не пугайте сократичек. Спасибо большое, Криста, что перевела мой доклад. Плохо быть дисциплинированной, присылать доклад за неделю до. Теперь он есть по-английски, вы можете прочитать его на сайте. Но я, конечно, поменяла тему.
So I sent my presentation to the interpreter. It now exists in English, so you can read it on the website if you would like to. I decided to change the topic of my presentation.
И попросила Константина фон Эггерта посмотреть, как будет на любом языке Блаткомитет, смотрящий из Ашквара.
You will have to say it now.
Yes.
So the three terms. Because we have such an impromptu change program, I will basically. Because we have such an impromptu change of program introduced by Ms. Federmesser, will continue in this informal vein. So the three words that all guests need to translate for her come from a criminal slang of Russian, and because she deals with Russia behind bars, with prisons, it's quite appropriate. So the first, which is zashkvar, means a shame that you can't wash off. Essentially, it's the ultimate level of shame. Blotkomitet is a group of top-level criminals who control the prison that get together and decide on what happens inside the prison. And the third one, which is что зашквар Блоткомитета, что еще?
Смотрящий.
Смотрящий. Well, смотрящий is someone who is appointed by the organized crime to watch over what happens in prison. Essentially, it is an authority which is sometimes stronger and more important than the authority of the prison master, the director of prison. So it all comes from informal criminal networks in Russia. So remember it, Zashkvar, shame, Blotkomitet, a committee of thieves that decide on everything that happens inside the prison, and Смотрящий is someone who's appointed by the organized crime from outside to watch on what happens inside the prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Константин. Исходя из этих глубоко научных терминов, совершенно понятно, что я буду говорить о взаимоотношении гражданского общества и власти.
Now that we have heard of those scientific terms, everybody will understand that I'm going to talk about the relations between the criminal society and the Russian government.
Мой доклад был посвящен либерализации экономических статей Уголовного кодекса. И спасибо Кристи, что она его перевела. Сейчас будет примерно то же самое, но с применением более научной терминологии.
Well, I planned my presentation to be on the liberalization and humanization of criminal and economic legislation in Russia. The interpreter already prepared this presentation, so you can read it up later on. So I'm going to talk about something very, very close to this, and by using those scientific terms we just learned about.
Я занимаюсь этой темой больше 10 лет. Я создатель и руководитель большого фонда Russian Behind Bars. Этот фонд имеет 5 отделений по всей России, более 2000 волонтеров, и у нас есть дочерний фонд в Праге и в Берлине. За нашу и вашу славу.
I've been dealing with these topics for more than 10 years. I founded the charity foundation Russia Behind Bars, and I'm also director of this foundation. We have 5 departments in different parts of Russia. We have about 2,000 volunteers working for our organization, and we also have a subsidiary in Berlin.
Единственный несудимый человек в нашем фонде – это я.
The only person that has not been charged or accused of crimes in our organization, that's me.
Потому что я живу в Берлине.
Because I live in Berlin.
Но много лет я езжу по тюрьмам России, изучаю пенитенциарную систему России. Я написала концепцию пенитенциарной реформы для Центра стратегических разработок. Мне понравилось, как Валентина Ивановна Матвиенко цитировала оттуда куски, когда разразился скандал с пытками в августе прошлого года, но, к сожалению, реформа не прошла. То есть я понимаю, о чем я говорю. Зашквар, Блаткомитет и смотрящий. Сейчас мы непосредственно к этому подойдем.
So I have spent a lot of time traveling around and visiting the penitentiary system in Russia, visiting prisons. I have also worked out concepts for reforms, strategic reforms of the penitentiary system, also in view of the scandal that happened in August of last year, when it actually became known that prisoners get tortured within this system, but unfortunately there haven't been any reforms so far. So I'm going to talk about those 3 terms now. The ultimate shame, top-level criminals in the prison system, and this authority person within the system that's kind of controlling what is going on inside by people that are outside. So a person that is part of organized crime.
Как устроена жизнь в русской тюрьме? Я вас уверяю, что в странах Европы, которых я хорошо знаю тюремную систему, часто бываю в тюрьмах, в Америке и даже в Украине она устроена совершенно по-другому. В Украине сейчас вообще идет большая реформа пенитенциарная. Крайне любопытно, обратите на это внимание, если вам интересна эта тема.
So I'm going to talk about how life in a Russian prison is organized, and I can tell you that it's completely different from what we know in European countries or in the US or even in Ukraine. Because in Ukraine there's been quite some significant reforms being done in the penitentiary system.
Есть абсолютно закрытая большая территория, где изолирована от общества, от интернета, от мобильной связи, от образования, от медицины, живет 2-3 тысячи человек. Чаще всего мужчин, но это не так важно.
So what is a Russian prison like? It's an absolutely closed, large territory, completely isolated from society, from the internet, from mobile communication, from medical services, from education. And these are about 2,000 or 3,000 people, mostly men, living in such a closed territory.
Так как считается, что это люди не первого сорта, преступники, да, то никто не занимается их правами, никто не смотрит за их бытом. такое государство в государстве образование. И там происходят крайне интересные вещи, которые копируются на других уровнях общества, вплоть до высшего.
So of course those people are not first-class citizens. After all, they are criminals. So nobody actually bothers about their rights or their everyday life. It's like it's a state within a state. And within this state, many interesting things keep happening. Things that also get copied in other groups of society.
Считается, что на зоне есть промышленное производство. Осужденные шьют милицейскую форму, кевларовые жилеты, делают металлические шкафы или какую-нибудь еще ерунду. На самом деле они занимаются работой на начальника, на офицеров, на прокуратуру и выполняют их заказы.
And there are people who think that prisoners actually are dealing with industrial production. They make uniforms or they make some metallic cupboards or other products. But actually, those people inside of prisons, they only work for some superior people. They work for the prosecutor or for prisons, wardens, and so on.
Это нелегальный и бесплатный труд, который не регулируется ничем. И если раньше мы говорили ГУЛАГ, стройки народного хозяйства, заключенные роют Беломор-канал, а сейчас нет, они и сейчас роют Беломор-канал, только на даче у силовиков. У каждого силовика есть свой маленький Беломор-канал, который построен руками заключенных совершенно бесплатно.
This, of course, is illegal work. It's free of cost, and it's not regulated at all. So when there were prisoners who had to build the Bellamore channel, the White Sea channel, many years ago, then we can say now any prison worker has his own touches, so he has his own White Sea canal. Or channel that's being built by prisoners.
Да, но заключенные могут жаловаться. Что же делать, чтобы они не жаловались?
And who would they complain to anyway?
Видимо, нужен кто-то, кто запретил бы заключенным жаловаться на начальство. Кто же это? Это как раз Блаткомитет и его глава, президент, смотрящий.
So, and of course, inside of this prison system, there needs to be people who make sure that prisoners do not complain. And who is responsible for making sure this is not going to happen? So it's, first of all, it's the Blutkomitee, so it's this top-level criminal organization in the prison that's controlling everything. And it's the Смотрящий, so this person, this authority person within the system.
Я напомню, что я рассказываю за отношения общества и гражданского общества и власти.
But I'm going to talk about the relations between civil society and the government.
Блаткомитет говорит каждому осужденному: если ты будешь писать жалобу в прокуратуру, в парламент, в ООН, Кофи Аннану, как они все обычно говорят. Я знаю, что Кофи Аннан давно умер, да. Но пишет Кофи Аннан, хорошо. Если вы будете жаловаться, мы будем вас пытать, бить. Я, смотрящий, распоряжусь, чтобы вам было плохо. Если вы пожалуетесь своим родственникам, у вас будут большие проблемы на зоне, очень большие проблемы. А кто же хочет проблем? Никто не хочет проблем.
And they tell the convicts, so if you want to complain maybe to the parliament or to the prosecutor's office or to the United Nations, to Kofi Annan, I know he is deceased already, we are just going to torture you. you will be beaten up, so you will have lots of problems here inside of prison. And who wants to be in trouble? Nobody.
Потому что никто не поможет. Все прекрасно знают, что осужденный здесь заперт на 5, 10, 15 лет. Ему здесь жить. Он не может уйти с этой зоны. Никто внешне, даже если узнает о его проблемах, реально помочь ему не сможет. Поэтому люди говорят, Блат-комитет, он очень сильный. Если я буду хорошо себя вести и буду помогать бить других заключенных, я буду допущен к общаку. Костя говорит, общак, пожалуйста. Я буду допущен к общаку, и мне перепадут немножко сигарет, чая. Я, пожалуй, не буду писать жалобы, и, пожалуй, буду помогать бить тех, кто собирается жаловаться. Кто думает жаловаться, кому не нравятся наши порядки здесь.
And because the convicts know that nobody from outside is going to help them, even if they know what is going to happen inside. And they know they have to live there for 5, 10, 15 years. And they also know that this blood committee is very strong. They very often decide to change sides. So they decide if I help them to beat up other prisoners, I might get some cigarettes, I might get more tea, and this might just be more advantageous for myself.
Но зачем это делает Блат-комитет? Зачем ему это надо? Потому что Блат-комитет, Господи, простите, зашкварил. Потому что эти криминальные люди нарушили свои же собственные правила.
What then happens? It happened. Why would they lose everything then? Because they actually violated their own rights. Their own rules. Okay, they violated their rules, yeah.
Они стали сотрудничать с офицерами, с руководством зоны, с красными, с милиционерами. Они начали сотрудничать, потому что это взаимовыгодное сотрудничество. Блат-комитет пугает всех осужденных, чтобы никто не жаловался, а за это получает от полиции, от руководства зоны, получает наркотики, алкоголь, икра, крабы, девушки. И это все эксклюзивные, то есть поставки. Взаимовыгодное сотрудничество, симбиоз. Прекрасный симбиоз криминальных авторитетов и представителей власти. Взаимовыгодный. Им очень выгодно. Блат-комитет получает наркотики и водку, а милиционеры получают стабильность и полное отсутствие жалоб. Никаких демонстраций, никаких восстаний, никаких жалоб, никаких комиссий, выполнение плана, прекрасное производство, никаких правозащитников, тишина.
So actually they changed sides. They worked with the officers, with the policemen. So the blood committee reacts to that, and for this committee, so these top level criminals in the prison, they get narcotics, they get alcohol, they get vodka. On the other hand, the police, they get stability. There are no demonstrations, there are no civil rights movements, there are no complaints, nothing. So it's this symbiosis that's advantageous for both sides.
Так устроена тюремная жизнь в России. Но разве только тюремная? Давайте посмотрим на последний скандал в Следственном комитете, когда арестовывают почти всю верхушку Следственного комитета, потому что она была на содержании у воров в законе. Кто удивился? Только не советский человек.
So this was about life in prison in nowadays Russia. What is the situation in society in Russia? I mean, just let's remember this latest scandal on the investigative committee. which was actually supported by what is called thieves within the law.
Кто удивляется, когда мы все посмотрели на прошлой неделе ролик, когда замминистра Росгеологии сидит перед монитором и говорит хорошо знакомым мне языком вещи, которые ни для кого не требуют перевода. Ни для одного русского человека это перевода не требует. Человек замминистра. И когда журналисты говорят в министерство, они говорят, что такого? Мы разберемся. Никто не удивляется. Когда повар Пригожин, много раз судимый, да, какие-то ЧВК, какие-то Центральноафриканские республики, друг Путина. А что такого? Ну, ничего же нового. Эта история тюремной жизни, русской тюремной жизни, она идет абсолютно на всех уровнях. Где же здесь гражданское общество? Ну, я же вам говорила, что 2-3 тысячи мужчин заключены на непроникаемой территории. Вот примерно так. А что? Примерно так. Я закончила. Спасибо.
We also saw this short film last week in Russia, where the Vice Minister of Russian Geological Department was sitting in front of the screen and using a language that actually doesn't need a translation within Russian society. Everybody understands where this language comes from. So the history of prison life in Russia is something that can be found on every level right now. So where is civil society? And as I said before, a prison in Russia is a territory, a closed, isolated territory where 2,000 to 3,000 men live. And this is actually what I wanted to say, and I'm going to close on this.
Когда на прошлой неделе в Сенате был арестован сенатор Арашуков, который, как выяснилось, организовал банду, 2 лично им убитых представителя власти тоже в Карачаево-Черкесии, украл газа на 30 миллиардов рублей. Я так посчитала, 15-й арестованный член Совета Федерации, из них сейчас 2 в тюрьме, один в Лефортово, один в Матроске, Дерев и Магомедов, и 2 в розыске, один в федеральном, другой в Интерполе. 170 сенаторов в России, то есть это у нас каждый 10-й член Верхней палаты парламента оказался бандит. А кто-то удивлен? Нормально.
You've all heard of the arrest of Senator Arashakov. Last week, he was arrested for embezzlement, also for creating a criminal organization in Karachayev-Cherkasy. The amounts that were mentioned are about 30 billion rubles. And this is only one arrest in a number of many. So there are senators and politicians at different prisons in Moscow now, at Lefortovo or at Matrosskaya Tishina. And 2 more are wanted right now. So these are 10 senators in Russia right now, either imprisoned or under investigation or wanted. So this is actually every 10th member of the upper chamber of the parliament. So every 10th member of this chamber turned out to be a criminal. Does it surprise anyone? It does not surprise us.
Русскоязычные люди, скажите мне, пожалуйста, Владимирский Централ и ветер?
Северный.
Я думала, западный. Спасибо. Все знают.
Okay, спасибо большое. Thank you very much, Olga, for demonstrating that civil society can be quite a stabilizing factor. This time in Prussia. But maybe also not only in Britain, but as you said, also in the whole society. Now, Nikolai Petrov, you had to wait quite a long time for your contribution, but we look forward to your idea about civil society in Russia. Please.
Great, thank you so much. As you perhaps have understood from our panel, there is intensive discussion going on now whether modernization from the bottom is possible and whether it's going on. And one school of thought is saying that, well, the state is archaic, it can be mafia state and so on, but the society is flourishing, and there are some good examples, and one of them has been presented by Nyuta, who is a great person doing great job. The other school is saying that it would be pretty strange if, in absence of any institutions, the civil society and the society in general will flourish without elections, without local self-administration, without anything. So I do belong to the second school, and I would gladly use the image of Nyuta of this pressure cooker. The thing is, who is a cook and who is a dish? And in my view, society is a dish rather than a cook, and the state is a cook. So to put in more political science terms, I would say that in my view, the civil society is more the object rather than the subject. And when answering the question put by the ambassador, I would totally agree. So my good news is that civil society is still alive. It's still alive, although it has passed through very serious changes last 20 years. It was not all the time in decline. It was really flourishing, was starting to flourish for a while, but last years especially, it's demonstrating very negative trend in the sense that it's more and more dependent from the state. It's less connected to the society as such. But there is civic landscape which is very different due to understandable reasons. In many cases we can see some good stories. In many more cases there are bad stories, failure stories, and we've seen it clearly during our session. I'll start with certain statistics. It's fashionable today to use Rosstat statistics, and according to them, we do have 220,000 non-commercial organizations in Russia. It's October last year. 140,000 of them are so-called social-oriented cause, including 30,000 dealing with sport, 18,000 patriotic organizations, 25,000 doing social services as Nyuta's organization is doing. So they do report about 650,000 persons involved and a little less than 3 million volunteers. The only problem connected with these nice statistics is that they do include state companies like Rostech, like Rosatom, into the list of non-commercial organizations, making figures very, very impressive, but without any real sense. So if Sergei Chernyshev is leader of civil society, then perhaps civil society is flourishing. My second point is that there is legal law enforcement and financial repressions going on against the civil society. There are sticks and carrots used, but sticks more and more intensively. And I would differ between three parts, or we can say three different civil societies. One civil society is the one supporting the state, or doing social services, making the life easier for the state. And this is unfortunately exactly your case. And that's why the state is eager to sometimes even to assist you. Although even in your story we've not seen any institutions. It's more about dialogue, if only you are capable to approach the single person making decisions, but not about any institutions at all. The second...
Not yet.
Okay, we'll continue our discussion. Okay, so the second part of civil society, or civil society number two, is the one opposing the state, like watchdogs. They are under huge pressure, and it's them who are suppressed most of all. And the third part is civil society, which is not connected to the state anyhow. They do ignore the state, and they're doing some work for the society as such. It's connected to your organization as well. So, the development of these three parts of Russian civil society is absolutely different. The state is eager to use the civil society in order to replace for social services. So the state is eager to refuse from social obligations, and if somebody can help them without getting as much money as, say, healthcare is getting now and misusing sometimes, then that's great. So the state can be very supportive with regard to this part of civil society. If it's watchdogs, then it's understandable the state doesn't need them. They did cut off any financial sources from outside, any financial sources coming from the business. And this is very important to understand. When speaking about Russia, we should have in mind that all actors are totally controlled by the state. So none businessmen can financially support civil society if being not permitted to do this by the state. And crowdfunding is very limited as well. This is the way Navalny, just like Obama in the past, got some money to finance his activism. So the civil society did evolve from being under the state control to a certain degradation. It has been domesticated by the state, and a lot of so-called Congress appeared. So one way is to shut up electoral observers, for example. Another way is to initiate and to establish 100 organizations pretending to observe elections. And if to read the most recent report by the Public Chamber, which is a kind of the ministry for civil society, they are proudly saying that they got 150,000 observers in recent elections, and they did provide these elections to be free and fair. Another very important direction of the civil society work, plus to observation, electoral observation, is anti-corruption fight. And this is once again the sphere where real organizations are under huge pressure, like Transparency International, and fake organizations, gongos, are appearing claiming that, well, they do control corruption, and there is no corruption, or it's controlled by them. And what is important about those figures, Olga did report us, it's the fact that, well, there are different ways to calculate. We should not speak about 170 members, because these 15 guys were arrested during a certain while. But another problem is that many more guys who have been not arrested are similar bandits. And the guy which was Arashukov, which was arrested last week, he was the member of the Council of Federation for a while, and it has been widely known that he's a bandit. So it's even bigger problem And it is possible for me now to say, first of all, about shrinking space for the civil society. There are certain spheres of Russian life where it's allowed to be active, and social services is the most important for the state. That's why civil society in this sphere is expanding. But there are many more spheres like electoral observation, like controlling authorities and the fight against corruption, where civil society is now almost, civic education, where civil society is almost absent. My next point is about repressions. Russian political regime is repressive regime, and the scale of repressions is increasing in time. Starting from 2012, after these Bolotny events, regime became very repressive, and there are targeted repressions against different groups in the society and different groups in elites. So they started against those who protested, but why it's possible to speak about repressions? It's not like, say, punishing those who've been involved into, say, protest most of all. It was like, say, choosing targets, victims, and sending signal everybody else that if joining this protest, you can be easily punished, and the punishment is pretty serious, several years in jail. So you should not participate rather than organize these protest events. But then there are nationalists who are under huge pressure, leftists, different confessional groups, corporate elites, regional political elites, and adding to Olga's calculation, I'll tell you that I do count how many guys from top regional elites are punished every year. And when saying punished, I mean 10 to 15 to 20 years in prison. And I do have these figures for several years. It's about 18 to 20 guys a year. And the total number of these top elites, I mean governors, deputy governors, and mayors of regional centers, is about 800 guys. So 2.5% of top regional elites are punished, including 5 governors who are in the jail. And you've heard perhaps about some of them. They've been punished not due to the fact that they did somehow violate internal rules of the game, not to speak about the law. They've been punished due to the fact that they've been weaker than other governors, and it sends very strong signal to all regional elites who are very much afraid of doing anything. That's why it's possible to say that Russian regional political elites are almost paralyzed now. So they're trying to avoid any movement in any direction because they don't know exactly why and when they will be punished. And civic organizations like election observation wallers, like ecologists, like Navalny, they are under this huge pressure as well. And let me add the memorial and different forms of civic education, like the famous Moscow School for Political Studies led by Nemirovsky. So when speaking about Russian civil society now, we should have in mind that half of our speakers should come not from Russia. There is Sergei Parkhomenko in the United States who is dealing with Discernet, discovering plagiarism in dissertations of top officials, Putin included, and he's staying there. There is Olga who is staying in Berlin, and that's why he's still free to come here. And let's hope that it will be forever. And many more guys, Lena Mirovska included, so her school cannot operate now in Russia. This is extremely important because how can you come to develop political culture to wait for civil society without civic education, for example? It's absolutely impossible. So we do not have elections, we do not have local self-administration, we do not have direct mayoral elections, for example, and we do not have civic education. And how can we speak about modernization from below in this case? Let me say a few more words about expertise. This is extremely important that we came, at least those who came from Moscow, from the country where there are a few experts. If to look at our panels, but this is due to Ludmila and Hans-Georg, it looks almost like a disclaimer. Brilliant experts who do participate in our conference. But in general, in Russia, there are almost no experts now because there is lack of expert community, there is lack of expert discussions, there is lack of studies. Without studies, you cannot count to keep being expert. Academy of Sciences is dying. And this is exactly the approach practiced by authorities with regard to many civic organizations. They've been under pressure. Now they are somehow alive, although those restrictions connected with the foreign agent status, with cooperation with undesired organizations and so on, doesn't make their life possible, not to speak about easy, and authorities are waiting for these organizations and their leaders to escape, to pass away in more or less natural way. So in many cases, like in case of the Academy of Sciences, we do have certain vision, we do still believe that it exists, but in general it's no more a real thing. So what does it mean in terms of prospects for future? It means that the civil society is pretty weak and it's still weakening, but our panel is about institutions and about dialogue. So I would say that dialogue, like the one we do have today, is extremely important. It's extremely important at a time when it's almost not going on in Russia, because a lot of foreign foundations did already leave from the country. A lot of experts are not allowed to come to the country, and there is no room for more or less neutral, objective discussions. This makes discussions like we do have today extremely important, and let me finish with thanking the Institute and Ludmila and Hans-Georg in particular for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was not just a very optimistic position you laid here on the table. Unfortunately, we don't have time for discussion because we overtook time and don't want to take much time of the other final discussion. But I want to give the panel a brief, 1 minute reaction. That's what you want to say. So, Ambassador Cede, you have been confirmed or not? What's your...
Well, listening to the last speaker, I'm rather confirmed by my proposal, by my proposition.
Okay, Andrey, a brief concluding remark from this discussion.
I would say that I agree with Nikolai, and our vision is similar. And one of the main problems is that all the success stories of modern civil society, they are based not on institutions, but on personal connections with authorities. This kind of a mutual exploitation of the civil society and the authorities, kind of a social contract between them, but it couldn't be so. It works only in some special cases. Yes, civil society must exploit this desire of authorities to make their image more humanized, so to say. But this is not the solving of the problem as such. And yes, we have such a special political angle of the situation. I mean, what Nikolai named repressive part of the story. And I would say that a lot of actions from the very top of the political pyramid, they have didactic sense in order to teach civil society. If you will behave like this, you will be punished. And this is the problem of a narrowing space of freedom.
Nyuta, you objected to the word that institutions are not yet involved. So how would you like to involve institution, or will you involve institution, not only the number one at the top?
You know, I started 25 years ago, and I only met the number one a couple of months ago. Yes, I will work so that institutions become stronger. They exist, they are just weak. But you know, I sit here and I feel that I sort of spoil the general picture, because without me everything would be... everything would be, you know, Russia's dying, and palliative care there is a sign that dying has become part of state strategy. No, it isn't. No. And people who think they are part of civil society, they are stubborn as mules. And if I listen to all this and get pessimistic, what's the use of me then back there? You will also want to go back home and die there. And that's why I will be strong, I will be optimistic, I will think about the institutes, and I'm not the only one, and I wish next year you have more people here who will spoil the overall picture of dying Russia, and then will flourish faster. I love, you know what, that's the book that I brought here. It was, it's a compilation of interviews given by my mother, and it is called, the main thing is, While You Live, Love. If this is the main idea of everything that we do, and I talk to you and I know that the idea of this gathering is because you all understand we have no right to live in misunderstanding. We have no right to live in misunderstanding. So this is the main thing. You have this book as well, please. And I will stay optimistic regardless.
So no palliative care for Russia yet. So.
No, only for Russian citizens.
Olga, you from Berlin or from Moscow? I don't know from which one.
В самолете. Я живу в самолете.
On the plane, I live on the plane.
Я родилась в маленьком городке под Москвой. У нас в классе было 30 человек. Половина погибли сразу. Это был конец Афганистана. Те мальчики и немножко девочек, которые выжили, погибли в 95-м в Чечне, где я тоже была. На неделе посадили по экономической статье последнего мальчика из нашего класса. У нас осталось 3 девочки. Очень интересно строить гражданское общество в России. Жалко не с кем. Я не училась в своей школе.
I was born and grew up in a small town not far from Moscow, and from the class of those 30 people I went to school with, half of this class died in the Afghanistan war. The rest of them in '95 in one of the Chechen wars, and one of them was just buried last week, and so there are 3 girls left. So we know what civil society has to do in Russia.
Thank you. Nikolai, one optimistic word about Russia.
I say I would compete with Nyuta for being called the biggest optimist among panelists. And the reason why is that I'm dealing with civil society and political institutions for 30 years. I'm much less successful than Nyuta is, but I do still keep doing this job.
Okay, thank you. That's a good one. Thank you very much. And there's a brief break, coffee break, but quick, because in 15 minutes about we start the next session. Thank you very much.